Romans chapter 5. We've been going through the book of Romans, so we're up to chapter 5 now. I'm going to start with verse 1. If you don't have your Bible, that's okay, because there's one on the screen. Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, we're going to go further than this, but I want to just kind of pause at this one real quick, because this kind of puts a nice little cherry on top of the last 4 chapters that we have looked at. The Apostle Paul spent a considerable amount of time in chapters 1 and 2 and 3 and kind of in stuff in 4 too. A lot of space there telling us how awful we are. I mean, maybe one of those weeks you came and thought, man, that's just kind of depressing, because that's kind of what he was setting up. He was reminding us who we really are. We're fools, we're broken, we're sinners, we've rebelled against God, and therefore worthy of God's wrath. Hopefully none of us are living in that moment now, but at some point in our life we were there. None of us are perfect. None of us have been beyond sin. None of us have been beyond rebelling or running away from God. And so that's what he addresses in the first few chapters. And like I say, it can get a little dark. It can get a little down. You might even have a little shame, like, oh man, you're right. I've done all those things, or some of those things, or part of those things. But he turns a corner in chapter 3, somewhere in there, and it says, but now Jesus. And that's been the fun part to talk about. But now Jesus offers forgiveness for fools like us. He took the wrath that was intended for us, that we had earned through our sin, through our disobedience. He took it on himself by dying on the cross. And through that work on the cross, he offers forgiveness, he offers hope, he offers healing, purity, righteousness for anybody who wants it. So it's a beautiful story. The gospel of Romans is telling us that, okay, yes, you're awful. Yes, you've rebelled. Yes, you ran for him. But he offers you forgiveness from all of that. He offers you a brand new life if you want it. He's not going to force it on you, but he offers it to us. And that righteousness that he talks about a lot in the last couple chapters, it doesn't come through like really strict obedience to the word day after day, like following all the rules, checking all the boxes. It doesn't come by obeying every verse of every book of the Bible. It comes through, as we declared last week, as Paul did, it comes through faith in Jesus Christ as the Son of God in his death, burial, and resurrection. It's a gift that we can't earn, a gift that it's not a payment for our awesomeness. It's a gift that we couldn't have done, and it lifts that dark, heavy cloud of guilt that we carry. It gives us new life. It gives us new hope. It gives us a change in our life that changes everything for us. And then in verse 1 here, Paul says, all that stuff from the first few chapters that we've talked about, it gives us peace with God. That I can be in this relationship with God, but I'm not afraid. I'm not cowering in fear. I'm not waiting for him to strike me with lightning because I don't measure up. That we have peace. We have peace with him. It's gone from being wrath-centered relationship to a peace-centered relationship. And most of us know from other relationships we had with other people that there's no real joy in a wrath-centered relationship, right? When you're always afraid that the hammer is about to drop, when you're always wondering what is going to happen next, that this outburst of wrath that's going to happen. I lived in a pretty wrath-filled home for the first 10, 11 years of my life. And it was, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like abusive, nothing really terrible happened to me. I had a great childhood. I felt loved, I felt safe, all that stuff. But still, there was an awful lot of wrath in my home. My dad was an angry man, right? I mean, he just was angry at everybody all the time. If he wasn't angry at the neighbor, who was a very mild-mannered preacher, he was angry at half the drivers around him. And if he wasn't angry at them, he was angry at the clerk at the store, wherever we happened to go that day. And if he wasn't angry at them, he was angry at teenagers, because they're teenagers, and he just didn't like them, I guess. That's before I was a teenager. Then he loved them. But if he wasn't angry at them, and I don't get it, this is going to sound racist, he was angry at Norwegians, right? I don't even know what a Norwegian is. Like, maybe I'm one. I don't even know. But he was always talking, oh, the Norwegians. As a kid, I'm going like, how do you know? I'm like, what? I don't know. Honestly, I grew up, that was part of my upbringing. He didn't care about any other ethnic group negatively, but Norwegians. So maybe he had some situation in his past. I'll ask him about that in heaven one day. But he was also often angry at his children. I wish I get to be one of those. And quite honestly, we were just kind of in his way. You know, he had things to do, he had a plan for the day, he had stuff, and we were just in his way all the time. And we were just a general all-around nuisance to him. It was just a story. We broke his stuff, we slowed him down, we didn't close the kitchen cabinets to his liking, we left his tools lying in the grass where they got rusty and wet. Someday, I was too young at the time to realize, but I thought, dude, didn't you like mow the yard? Wouldn't you have seen that? That wouldn't have gone well. But I remember him picking up tools. We left this in the grass, and it was all rusty. And I'm like, I'm sure my brother did it. It couldn't have been me, right? We left toys lying all over the place where he could trip over them and step on them or whatever. And honestly, if I had to graph it out, over 90% of the memories that I have of my dad are all centered around him yelling at us, swearing at us, threatening to do great bodily harm to us. He never did, but threatening to, because we made him angry. And so because of that, because that was the context, that was the home, every time I walked in the door, I wondered, well, who's he going to yell at today? Who's going to get it? Where's the hammer going to go down next? Who's going to get it next? And I knew there was a pretty good chance it could potentially be me, because if I were completely honest, I probably deserved it most of the time. If I hadn't used my bow and arrow to shoot arrows into the home through one of our side windows, he probably would have been happier about that. Or we lived in a time when you had big barrels out in the backyard, just burn stuff, right? And nobody cared. And so I thought it was really funny to put aerosol cans in there, because you never know when they're going to blow up, He didn't appreciate that all the time. He didn't appreciate all the tools I made him repurchase. There's the time I had an empty box of Quisp, my favorite cereal, which I probably tossed to the garbage can, and it didn't make it to the garbage can, it just stayed on the stove. I didn't know the stove was on. And a few minutes later, it was bursting into flames, and he wasn't happy I don't get it, he wasn't really happy about that either. So in honesty, I don't know that I was really innocent in the relationship. That's why I say, don't get me wrong, I'm not like dogging my dad. I'm the one who encouraged that anger. Point being, it was a home of tension, right? It was a home of stress. When you have a man with a hot temper that's lying or living with a brood of children who give him plenty of things to be angry about. We all walk on eggshells. Everyone's watching their words closely. Everyone's watching their steps closely. Because when you're not fully developed young brain decides to do something that you think is going to be a great idea, and later on decide, oh, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. You just know the hammer's going to come down pretty soon. Sooner or later, he's going to come asking, who is it that put all those BB gun holes in the garage windows? And one of us will have to answer that it was me. It was such a good idea at the time. What a perfect target, It was, in my mind, it worked greatly. Now, this was our relationship with God that Paul was describing in the first 4 chapters. Before Jesus went to the cross, we tried to live well, we tried to make good choices, but at the same time, our underdeveloped spiritual minds did things that later on we said, I guess that really didn't do well. That's not really what God asked us to do. Periodically, in retrospect, we realized we were foolish, right? We did our best to keep our distance from God because we knew he was mad. It was a relationship of wrath. He's mad at me, kind of like Adam in the garden. He was like, okay, I crossed the line. Adam and Eve went and hid. We don't want God to find us, and we kind of did the same thing. All the time knowing one of these days, he'll catch up to us, the hammer's going to come down, and we're going to feel the full fury of the wrath of God, because it's described over and over and over in Scripture. But now, we have been justified through faith in Jesus Christ. But now, we have peace. So I no longer have to walk around in fear of God. I no longer have to worry that that thing I did 10 years ago is going to catch up to me. That thing I did last week is going to catch up to me. That horrible thought I had is going to catch up to me. Because now we've been justified through faith in Jesus Christ, justified just as if we had never sinned, right? And we're pure and holy before God because Jesus took our sin on the cross. And we have peace with God. Guilt is gone, tension is gone, the shame is gone, the fear is gone, disappointment is gone. All we have left is peace. That's what he's saying in verse 1. We have this amazing relationship of peace now with God. Now that's beautiful when it happens in your life. It ended up happening with my dad later on in life, just to be fair to him. I mean, we got to my 20s, and that's when I realized that our relationship had turned from a wrath-filled relationship to a peace-filled relationship. It took me a while to catch on. I think it had earlier, but I hadn't noticed it. My brother went to Bible college. 3 years later, I went to the same Bible college. Caused my dad to become a little inquisitive, intrigued, like, what is this Bible thing? He'd read it before, but not seriously. And he started reading it. I didn't know it. And we'd go visit, and he'd ask questions, and I thought, it's probably the same as feeling to me that he had toward our neighbor. He's probably waiting to trap me. He's waiting to pounce on me. He's waiting to put the hammer down and say, what a fool, you disappointed me. Why are you going to be a preacher? You should be a postman like I am. You should do the good stuff, right? And I kept waiting for it to happen, and it never did until one day I was listening to his questions, and I thought, wait a minute, he's not trying to trap me. Matter of fact, the questions he was asking shows he actually read the text. Like, I can tell when I get in a conversation with an atheist, because they haven't even read the thing, and they're just like, oh yeah, what about blah, 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 they throw out something that everybody says, and it's like, okay, whatever, and you answer the question, knowing they don't want to know it, These were areas where he had actually read the Bible, and he was like, what does this mean? Like, whoa. Once I realized that, we turned a corner, and then every time we got together, we talked Bible and stuff. He became a great committed Christian, was a treasurer in their church, a leader and everything, and before he passed away. So I fully intend to see him in heaven, and what a great reunion that's going to be, because we now went from wrath to grace, right, to peace. And that's beautiful. That happens not only in our relationship with God, but it happens in our relationship with people when we allow God to take over those relationships. So Paul is setting that foundation in Romans 5:1. We have peace with God, and then he gets to an extremely important practical application of what does that mean. So great, you have peace. What does that mean? So what? So he goes on in verse 2. We have also obtained access through him by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. So what a change. We were running from God. We were in shame. We were in this relationship of wrath. We were trying to avoid him, just pretending he wasn't there, just ignoring him, just definitely staying away from church because that'll just remind me how awful I am, all of that stuff. And now our relationship has turned from that to boasting. I know him. I know Jesus. He loves me. He's my Father. He loves me. He saved me. He forgave me. He purified me. He made me holy, made me righteous. All the words we talked about in the last couple chapters. And then look what he says in verse 3. Not only that, but we also boast in our afflictions. That sounds weird. I love it when I go through a rough time. And then, we rarely say that. We boast in our afflictions because we know that affliction produces endurance. Endurance produces proven character. Proven character produces hope. This hope will not disappoint us because God's love has been poured out in our hearts through the Holy Spirit who is given to us. Boast in our afflictions? Yeah. Not because we like pain, right? It's not that. It's because we realize this peace that we have from God. It gives us confidence that God is standing with us in the midst of our suffering. We're not alone. He hasn't thrown us outside and shut the door and said, you made your bed, you go lie in it. No, we're in affliction, he's standing right there with us, and he's working with us in our suffering. He's helping and using that affliction to help develop character in us. And so we have hope that our suffering, anytime we go through hard times, it's not meaningless, it's not without purpose, it's not pointless, but he's building something in us. So let's just walk real quick through Paul's progression here that he mentions in these verses. Affliction produces endurance. Right? What do you do when a child's learning how to ride a bike and they fall off the bike? I mean, hopefully you don't laugh at them. Sometimes it's funny, but don't let them see that, right? You're watching, and they're hurt, right? And maybe there's a little blood going down their knee, and they think their life, like this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their lives. I mean, before they fell on carpet, and they had little padded diapers, and, it was just like, oh, they thought it was bad. It wasn't, but this is like, it's gotten worse. I fell off my bike on a sidewalk, and it's awful. What you do at that moment is you cheer them back on, right? Get back on. Come on, you can do this. Get back on. And you do that because in their mind, they're making some lofty decisions about life. I mean, all they do is fall off their bike. But they're thinking, I don't ever want to get on that bike again. Because that bike equals pain. That bike makes red stuff drip out of my knee. I don't even know what that is. That bike brings agony to my life. And they start wondering, what if I fall down again? What if every time I get on the bike I fall down? What if I get hurt? What if I get going and I can't stop? What if I try to turn and I hit a crack and then, something was what if I break a leg? They don't even know what that means. But they're thinking all these horrible things. There are so many reasons to not get back on the bike. And some kids don't. I don't know if that's too common anymore, but I've known adults who just never learned to ride a bike. I bet they tried, and I bet they fell down once, and I bet there was no one there to say, get on that bike, and push them through it. As much as they hated to, they let them say, okay, if you don't want to, you don't have to. They let them have a soft life, and they didn't get back on their bike, and they never experienced the joy and the freedom of riding a bike because they were afraid of what might happen if they do it. But most do get on the bike again, and it could be a little scary. It is, you don't know, but you get going and you keep doing it, and you have success, and you go 10 minutes without falling down or 50 feet or whatever, and you keep getting a little bit further. And before long, you see them jumping over ramps and popping wheelies and doing tricks and doing all kinds of crazy stuff because they endured. All the little falls built up, and they learned to say, like, I'll probably survive this. I'm going to be all right. Even if I'm going to fall again, they're not afraid. They've built up endurance. And endurance, it happens in every area of our life, not just bikes, obviously, right? Endurance produces proven character. There comes a point when you've fallen down enough times that you're not going to let a little accident keep you from going. I mean, it might hurt, and you're going to, and you might be disappointed and everything, but you're going to get back on, and you're going to go, because you just do. You've got character. Now, several years ago, I was training for RAGBRAI, the bike ride across Iowa, and I was with a group of guys, and we were doing and gals, we were doing 72 mile loop around the Raccoon River area, and so we're doing this Saturday bike ride, 72 miles, and I'm going along, and in this area, I'm just on this little pace going, they're probably going 22 miles an hour or something, and there's like rock on either side, and it's kind of, I don't know why they don't use river rock, it's like jagged rock, like stay away from the rock, but anyway, it was a nice little trail, but what happens sometimes if you're not careful, if you're not engaged, you can be moving along, and you got a nice breeze going, and you're just going at a good pace, you got a rhythm going, and you just kind of get lost in it. You just kind of mesmerize, and the grass and everything's just flying by, and it's like a blur, kind of like looking at a car, and you stare at it, and it just kind of gets a little blur. And if you're not careful, you just kind of get lost in it and forget what you're doing. Maybe you start thinking about other things, like something else. Tomorrow I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. And I'm doing that. I'm going, like I say, going about 22, 24 miles an hour, going at a good clip, and I forget I'm riding a bike. And I'm comfortable in it. I'm in this groove. And then I just kind of go off the trail, right? Now, what happens is the gravel's kind of loose, so the bike tire goes into the gravel and stops. Dan does not stop, right? So the bike stops and flips, and I don't know, I went flying, I rolled a few times in the gravel, and it wasn't gravel, a rock, and I get up, and I'm like, I've ripped my clothes in several places, all the biking gear stuff, right? And I just got rips on it, I got blood all over the place, like, oh, this is kind of wild. Fortunately, I had a helmet on, it was good, it was safe. But what I did then was I thought, well, I've still got like 30 miles or so to go, so I jumped on my bike and I kept going, right? Because I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to say, oh, I fell down. Cheryl, come pick me up. I've done that before and rag-bribed for her. But it was like, we're going to finish it. We're going to do it. We got on the bike and we kept going. See, endurance produces proven character. That's what happens. If that was my first fall ever, that would have been it. I probably never would have gone on the bike again. But I had so many before that. It's like, okay, so it's a fall. I've cut myself before. Okay, whatever. It'll heal. I've got bruised before. I've been in motorcycle accidents before. I survived. I'm okay. It's going to be all right. And I just got on and kept going. Endurance creates some type of character so that you're not easily taken down and defeated by life. You're stronger through the hard times. It happens in life too. It happens in life. If you lose your job, maybe it's because there's layoffs, maybe you got fired, maybe you did something and it crossed the line, maybe you just quit and said like, I just don't like it. Whatever it is, it can be traumatic, right? You're like, oh man, what am I going to do? I don't have a job now. Well, if it's your first time, it's going to be more traumatic than it was like your 14th time. If it's your 14th time, we probably should talk. You might have something going on. But if you've done it enough times, at some point you go, well, I was looking for a job and I found that one, and you go get a job. I mean, it's an endurance that builds character, and you just keep going. I'm not going to let that stop me. Same thing happens with relationships. You have a relationship, if it's your first one and it ends, you're thinking, man, life will never be the same again. It's over. This is awful. If you had 10 or 12 relationships that end, at some point you go, that's not pleasant. I don't enjoy it. I don't like it, but I was looking for someone. When I found them, I'll probably find someone else, and you get on. It doesn't make it easier, but you have endurance and strength and character, and you're like, okay, I'm going to make it through this. I'm going to do this. You don't feel lost and like life is over. Endurance creates the kind of character that can't be taught. I couldn't give you a nice little outline on what a character is, but you can earn it through hardship. There's an old saying that says, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. If we get too soft, we haven't had hard times ourselves, we just kind of make a mess of stuff because we're missing a little bit of character. I think if you look at our culture today, you can look at previous generations that have set us up for a wonderful time in America, but the current generation can't handle it because we haven't been through the hard times our forefathers went through. I was born late in my family. So my dad had a completely different experience growing up than I did. He was 16 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed. He was a student at North High School here in Des Moines. And when Pearl Harbor was bombed, a friend of him, and he and his friend, dropped out of school, went to the Navy recruiter and said they were 18. And I don't know, back then they didn't check that stuff evidently, and they took him, and he was, before he knew it, was on a warship in World War II. He went through some things that developed character in his life. He got a little angry, we had that issue, but he worked through that too later on. I've never experienced anything like, I had a bike wreck. I mean, I've had a pretty good life. My children have had an even better life. They've gone through hardship of other things, but I mean, I'm saying that we most of us haven't experienced that kind of hardship, and our country is showing that right now. By the way, we're responding to things. Weak men create hard times. So it'll create hard times, and a new generation will come up and they'll fix everything, and they'll be stronger for it. Hopefully, we'll figure that out before things get too hard. Spiritually speaking, the same thing happens to us. You'll have the first generation. We looked at this, and we studied through the book of Judges several years ago, and just the cycle that Judges goes through over and over again. You're always thinking, man, they were doing great. They all repented. They all got rid of the idols. They all loved God. Everything was going great. And it wasn't too long from then that pretty soon everybody's doing idols again. Like, what in the world happened? It happens over and over and over again in the book of Judges. And we kind of talked about it back then. The first generation, they experience God, right? They understand. It starts out in Judges, and Joshua, and he experienced the miracles of God. He experienced Egypt. He experienced getting out of Egypt. He experienced God feeding them day after day, miraculously through the desert. He experienced God delivering them from their enemies, battle after battle. So that generation saw God at work personally. Then they all had children. Those children who grew up, they did not personally experience God in those ways. They heard the stories. They saw the passion in their parents' eyes and in their voices. They thought, man, this God must be pretty cool. I haven't experienced what you've experienced, but man, he seems pretty good. We ought to take note of that. And the next generation comes along, but they don't. That second generation doesn't pass along with the same fervor that the first generation did. Because they're like, no, we'd have starved to death in the desert. Right? We would have stayed in Egypt. You should have seen the sea split. I mean, all the stories, right? The second generation tells that, but the third generation is like, well, that's cool, but they don't pass it on like the previous generation. It's not a personal experience. It sounds cool, but there's other gods out there that does too, right? I mean, they say, let's check out some of that stuff, Let's not get too carried away here. And in Judges 2:10, it says that generation did not know the Lord or the work he had done for Israel, right? That they didn't even know God anymore. That was just 2 generations later after Joshua. And they're like, and they get into idol worship. And that happened over and over and over through the book of Judges. Dr. Randall Smith put it this way: what happens when one generation is powerfully changed by God is that the second generation grows up in the programs of the church rather than the power of redemption. And the third generation just becomes cynical because they don't know any of it. There's no passion there. Like, okay, that's your faith. We do our own thing. It's just a natural progression. So as awful as hardship is, as awful as affliction is, what happens is when we face affliction, when we spiritually or physically, whatever, fall off our bicycles, what happens is it drives us to our knees and we experience the redemptive power of God in our lives personally. It's not my parents' God. It's not my grandparents' God. At some point we realize, man, I need God. I can't survive without him. Affliction drives us to that. And when we experience that, it allows us to experience his healing and comfort and his miracles firsthand. That's what develops character. And then character, well, it produces hope. When you've been through the mill enough times, you've fallen off your bike enough times, you've made the mistakes, you've done the things, you've seen God pull you through time after time after time. The next time hardship comes, you just kind of shrug your shoulders and say, well, let's see what God's got going on this one. It doesn't mean you enjoy it, doesn't mean you love it, but there's a certain amount of boasting in it. Man, God must have something big for me because life is really rotten right now. This is tough. God's got something going on. You start seeing what he's doing and how he's working. That's hope. It's the confidence that says that there is nothing that can come against me that God can't handle. Nothing. I just know it. Why? Because I've been through stuff and I've seen it. I don't know the details. I don't know how he's going to handle it. I don't know how long this suffering will last. But I just know he's going to handle it. He's going to do something in here, and I will rest in his peace. Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ.